We've been in a series called Fallen Empire that started in the book of Genesis. And if you're new to church, the book of Genesis is the first book of the Bible. Well, now we're in the last book of the Bible. Yemi just read to us from the book of Revelation. And we've been considering the empire of Babylon. And Babylon starts off as this empire that says, people say, come, let's build a tower to the heavens and make a name for ourselves. And it's all about human pride and human glory and human empires that try to amass power for themselves apart from God's wisdom. It's humanity doing its own thing. And then we looked at all the nuances of that, as we even saw that Solomon, who knew God, he started behaving just like Babylon. So sometimes people even who claim to know God can become Babylon. We traced it through its the exile in Daniel with the Jews, and they're trying to live in the actual Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar, and they're trying to function, and they're trying to, at sometimes they have to choose their battles, and then at other times they have to resist and defy the king's order. And then we got to Jesus and saw a total revolution, that Jesus' value system is utterly the opposite, utterly contrary to the kingdoms of this world and the authority figures of this world. And then now we're getting to the book of Revelation. Little spoiler alert, we did skip over 1 Peter, and that's because we're going to study the entire book of 1 Peter this fall. So Peter actually talks about Babylon quite a bit. But here we are in the book of Revelation. And I've titled my message today on borrowed time. Now, a couple years ago, me and my family got really into this TV series called Alone. Have any of you seen this? A little show of hands. Anybody check out that TV series Alone? Well, the way it works is 10 contestants get dropped in like northern Canada or Alaska or some just far off, crazy remote place. And all they have is like a hatchet and like some paracord. And they just have to live in the middle of grizzly country or something. And the whole idea is last man standing. They're separate. They're alone, obviously. And they're like filming themselves with little GoPros and stuff. And they have to live in the wilderness as long as possible. And it's basically who's going to tap out first, who's going to cave, who can stick it out the longest. And they're waiting for their other contestants to just like get malnourished. And then, oh my gosh, my little fishing thing broke and I can't catch fish anymore. I tap out. And then whoever can last the longest wins $1 million. All right. So there's $1 million cash prize. So they have the chance to, try to get that $1 million, hold out as long as possible with that in their future. This one guy, the longest guy, Roland Walker, he lived for 100 days. He was the longest lasting contestant. Imagine that. He's catching all of his own food. He's having to build his own shelter. He has no help from the outside world. It's just absolutely crazy. It lasted 100 days. Now I want to ask you this. Imagine there's no $1 million involved. Imagine you just get dropped out in the Tillamook, or you just get dropped out in Alaska, or you get dropped out somewhere, and there's no money involved. How long do you think you'd last? I would get out of the car. I would all right, get back in the car. I wouldn't stay out there very long, right? And what's the point? Is what you believe about the future determines what you are able to endure in the present. Because they believe there's $1 million waiting for them, they're willing to endure a lot. But imagine if you believe nothing's waiting for you. Imagine if there's nothing ahead of you. Imagine if you have no hope for the future. You're not going to stick it out very long. Well, the book of Revelation tells us that there's something good waiting for us in our future. And what you believe about the future is going to affect the way you live in the present. Now, I want to say the book of Revelation is not a code book. It's not like a puzzle book of how to piece together the news headlines to know exactly when Jesus is going to return or when the world's going to end, when the Armageddon and the apocalypse are going to happen. The book of Revelation is not a code book. Jesus actually, on more than one occasion, says nobody knows the day or the hour. Nobody knows when it's going to happen. So we make ourselves into fools when we try to figure out exactly when it's going to happen. But it's a real book, a real letter, written by the Apostle John, Jesus' best friend. And he's writing to Christians living under Emperor Nero and then probably Domitian. And these are Roman empires who are brutally oppressing Christians. And Rome and its military might and its political power has gotten so big that there's actually like religious allegiance to the emperor. And there are cults that worship Caesar and they worship him. And Christians, like we've studied throughout this series of learning how to live in Babylon, they're willing to pay taxes. They're willing to be good citizens. They're willing to just, function, like people living in Rome. They do a lot of that. But they refuse to worship Caesar. And so they're seen with suspicion, and they're seen with disloyalty, and eventually they get viewed as committing treason, committing sedition, being, hostile to Caesar because they're not willing to say that Caesar is Lord. They're only willing to say that Jesus is Lord. So Jesus gives this vision to John of the ultimate fate of Rome and of the ultimate fate of every Babylon, of every empire that's built on violence and greed and brutality and decadence. He gives them this vision, which Yemi just read part of it to us, and he's giving them hope of the ultimate fate of the world. Why? So that these Christians who are, we know from history, they're going to be crucified, they're going to be fed to lions, they're going to be attached to chariots, and I don't want to be like too disturbing here, but like ripped apart by horses going in opposite directions, and all of these horrible, horrible tortures are going to happen to them. And he's giving them a vision of the future, which is giving them the ability to kind of stay in the woods, right? To not tap out, to stay in the woods for 100 days, so to speak, because there's hope on the other side of it. And I just want to say to us, and we're living in a world that is, a lot of times contrary to God, and it is telling us to live for money and telling us to live for success and trying to tell us to live for fame and for sex and for pleasure and for experiences. We are living in Babylon, and Babylon exerts a pressure on us. It might not be the pressure to actually bow down and worship Caesar, but there is a pressure upon us, isn't there? There's a pressure to conform, a pressure to want to blend in Portland, to fit in, to not feel like the weird ones, the odd ones out. And we want to cave. But what we believe about the future is what's going to give us the strength to endure the present. Now, there are some people who would say, Jesse, Jesus is never going to come back. All right, there's no heaven, there's no hell, there's no afterlife. But here's the thing: if you believe history has no destination, if you believe history's headed nowhere, if you believe that all that's ahead of us is that when we die we rot, and that one day the human race will go extinct and the universe will go away, how are you ever going to live a life of purpose? How are you going to ever live a life that makes a difference? How are you ever going to live a life of joy? How are you not going to just collapse into despair? What you believe about the future determines what you're able to endure in the present. And this book, Revelation, is telling us that history is headed somewhere, that there is hope for the future, that there is light at the end of the tunnel. And I think we need to hear that on a dark day like today as our nation seemingly goes to war again. All right, so our first thought today is that Babylon's days are numbered. Babylon's days are numbered. Verse 9, when the kings of the earth who committed adultery with her and shared her luxury see the smoke of her burning, they will weep. And this is a metaphor. Babylon becomes a woman like a harlot, and then Jerusalem, the new Jerusalem that is, it's God's kingdom, is depicted as a bride. It says, they will mourn for her, terrified at her torment. They will stand afar off and cry, woe, woe to you, great city, you great and mighty city of Babylon. In 1 hour your doom has come. The merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Christians throughout all of history, it's in all of the creeds, it's all in the apostles' writing, it even goes back to the Old Testament and the Jewish, they believe that history does have an end. That one day God is going to come and he's going to come set the world right. That he's going to put a stop to evil once and for all, and he's going to heal his creation. That's the promise. that Jesus is going to come back and Babylon will be no more. Babylon is living on borrowed time. The clock is ticking. Babylon, you could say, is going out of style. Look at verse 11. This is a longer section, but it mentions something really interesting. This is actually like a Roman cargo list. This is a manifest from like a Roman ship. Cargoes of gold, of silver, of precious stones, of pearls, of fine linen, of purple, of silk and scarlet and cloth. I'm going to jump down, and then this is what's really powerful and arresting. And human beings sold as slaves. You notice that? It's just thrown into the Roman cargo list. You know, I skipped over the verses, but it says like spices and cimarron and all of these things, and chariots, and and human beings sold as slaves. But the ESV actually translates that verse more effectively, because the way it's actually written in Greek is it says slaves, that is human souls. So here he's writing out a cargo list exactly the way any manifest on any ship would have contained it. It would have been like, pearls and gold and horses and these things. And he's writing it exactly the way the Romans write it. Every word of this is identical to a Roman cargo list. And slaves, that's how it ends. But John does something very subversive. He does something very powerful here. He adds the words at the end. And after slaves, he wrote, that is human souls. No Roman cargo list ever said that. And back then, there were slaves of every race. There was tons of, anybody could basically be a slave unless you're a Roman citizen, but anyone they conquered. But I do want to say it's significant because this week was Juneteenth, right? Where it's now a federal holiday finally, but Juneteenth is when the final slaves in Texas got word of the emancipation and were liberated. And in a lot of ways, America has functioned like Babylon. All right? And in many ways, it's operated just like Rome. It's based on military might. It's based on power. It's got this unbelievable economy. And it is traded on human souls. It's traded on human beings. And so I just want to kind of acknowledge that and also acknowledge Juneteenth. But I want to give another metaphor that's maybe just a tiny bit lighter, but also significant and important. I went into the Lloyd Center Mall a while ago. Anybody done this? Like, if you go in the Lloyd Center Mall in a midweek these days, it feels like a Jordan Peele movie. like you feel like you are in some dystopian Twilight Zone. No offense if like you still love Lloyd Center Mall. And there are lots of crafty people who have their little crafty shops in there now, so that's kind of good. But a lot of it, especially from where I entered from the west side of it, where there's less shops, so it's all these dilapidated, there's like glitching lights, like broken down kiosks, and then there's like one old lady ice skating to Frank Sinatra, and you're like, where am I? Terrifying. Anyways, so we go to Lloyd Center Mall, and I discover that Forever 21 is permanently going out of business. And you may be judging me if you're like really cool and stylish, but like I'm from Albuquerque, and I can still remember when I was like 15 years old going to California and going into 21 Men. That was the men's area of Forever 21, and being like, this is the trendiest clothing I've ever seen in my life. I'm going to go back to Albuquerque and be the coolest kid ever, and just thinking it was so great, like back in like 2015 or whatever. But I go into Forever 21 and I find out, all the Forever 21s in the whole nation are shutting down. And they were, famous for their fast fashion, their trends, their extremely cheap prices. And I go in there, and they're actually not only selling all the clothing, they're selling the displays. They're selling the shelves. Like, there are price tags on the mannequins. Like, you can just buy anything you want here. And I couldn't help but go, well, nothing lasts forever. I just immediately thought that. But I want to think a little bit deeper, okay? Because imagine being an executive or an entrepreneur in the early days of Forever 21. Just like trying so hard to build this empire. I will do anything. This is my empire. And then getting to that point where 15-year-olds from Albuquerque are so elated to go visit one in California. Like getting to that point where you've built this corporate empire and you've risen to the top. And I really want to imagine, imagine being like a manager in Forever 21's heyday. And like the people you said, you showed up late for work, you're out of here. Oh, you're nothing. You're not loyal to the brand. You're not loyal to the company. Imagine being these executives that we have to turn profits up and to the right. We've got to get our quarterlies up. We've got to get our numbers up. We've got to push. This is Forever 21. This is everything. This is our world, right? Because that's how it is when you're passionate about your career, when you're passionate about a company. And there it was. And then what's really tragic is discovering that the way they were able to sell $13 dresses is that in Los Angeles, it turned out they ran sweatshops that were paying people $4 an hour below the minimum wage. It was like, but this is Forever 21. We have to do it. We justifying it, rationalizing it, just stop at nothing, anything to build this empire. But here's the deal. Babylon has fallen. Babylon has fallen. That kingdom is crashing down now. Now they're selling the shelves, selling it off. Were all of those decisions worth it? Were the bodies they trampled on worth it? Were the lives they trampled on worth it? No, they weren't worth it. And that is what Revelation 18 is telling us. And look at verse 14. They will say, the fruit you longed for is gone from you. All your luxury and splendor have vanished, never to be recovered. If we build our lives on anything other than God, we are building our lives on something fragile. We're building our lives on something temporary, on something ephemeral, on something that can and will be lost. Babylon's days are numbered. I've said this many times, but I was, talking with somebody from church, and people's confidentiality is extremely important to me, so I'm just saying this in very vague, broad brushstrokes. But he was saying it resonates so much that, you make your whole life about this relationship. This is my meaning in life. This person's my everything. They're my life. They're my this. Then they break up with you. You have no life. You have no meaning. Your whole life is your career. Your whole life is this. And then boom, a horrible injury or an economic downturn or a war breaks out or, this person gets elected and it all comes crumbling down. You live for this political party. I mean, I'm not here like throwing shade on the man at all, but I remember I had this friend who he was just all in for Bernie Sanders. He was gung-ho. It was all he posted about, all he talked about. It's a once-in-a-lifetime candidate. Bernie Sanders. And then I remember the day that Bernie Sanders resigned or conceded, and I just remember him tweeting, "Everything is bad. There is nothing good." He built his whole life on something that was temporary. He built his whole life on something that was fragile, that was ephemeral. You see, if we live our lives for things that are earthly and worldly, we are going to become people who eventually are fragile. We're going to become people who have our hearts broken again and again and again. All that is not eternal is eternally out of date. The only thing to build your life on that will make you a stable person, a steady person, a loving person, somebody who doesn't need to trample on others to get a leg up. The only thing to build your life on is to build your life on Jesus. Here's the deal. Babylon will lie to us. It'll never satisfy us. And when Babylon goes up in smoke, we will weep and howl like these merchants. All right, next thought is that we can resist Babylon without using its methods. Resist Babylon without using its methods. I've already kind of alluded to this here, but look at verse 24. In her, why is God so mad at Babylon? You're like, God, you're so mad at Babylon. You're mean to Babylon. Well, check out verse 24. In her was found the blood of the prophets and of the saints and of all those who've been slain on earth. God cares about victims. He cares about the victims of Babylon. He cares about those people getting paid under minimum wage. He cares about the slaves that were on those Roman slave ships. God cares about that. I'll just nod briefly again to the whole persecution side of this. I read an article in BBC, which is secular. This is just as mainstream as it gets. BBC recording that Christians today are the most persecuted group on the planet. Christians in Africa, Christians in Asia, Christians in the Middle East, they're the most persecuted group on the planet, and we should care about our brothers and sisters in Christ across the world, and we shouldn't take our faith for granted. We shouldn't take our worship for granted. But I don't even want to just focus on that, because God isn't just concerned with his own people who've been victimized. All the commentators point out that at the end of verse 24, it says, in Babylon was found the blood of all those who've been slain. All the victims of every war, victims of every exploitation, of every bit of oppression. God sees the victims of all of them. I was hanging out with a buddy, and he gave me permission to share this story, but I was hanging out with a buddy who worked for a major delivery service, one of the biggest ones, and he was delivering all of our packages, right? And we ordered all these packages, and there really are people out there breaking their backs, delivering them for us constantly. But he said he was working for this delivery company, and it was intense, back-breaking work, and corporate was just always on your neck, never giving you a break, throwing you out into the deep end. He was saying how intense it was, and there was this one guy who was always really, really stressed out. And one day they're in the warehouse, and this guy has a heart attack on the warehouse floor and dies. And guess what? The ambulance comes in to take the body. They picked up his little tracker device, the scanner device, handed it to the new guy, called the morning meeting, and did not say a word. Got to get those rounds, got to get those deliveries, got to get those packages out. Tick-tock, 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 tick-tock. That is Babylon. That is the spirit of Babylon. That's how Babylon operates. And now there's a lot of people in Portland who go, and that's why we need another French Revolution. A lot of people in Portland, they see that and they're outraged. We need to rise up. We need to fight back. I mean, I don't know about you. I see the posters around town. I hope that I'm not like a crazy person when I say this stuff. But like I walk around, I see the posters, all this stuff, rise up, fight back, eat the rich, all of these things. I see it all around town, and it's getting pretty serious because there's more and more assassinations happening in the United States, right? There's an attempt on the president-elect, the guy running for president last year, but then there was the healthcare CEO who got assassinated. Now, last week in Minnesota, 2 state senators got assassinated. It's ratcheting up, isn't it? The violence is ratcheting up in this country. And what that is according to the book of Revelation, that is using Babylon's methods to fight Babylon. You're doing the same thing that Babylon does. You're shedding blood to get back at Babylon. But all throughout Revelation, we see a different way. We see what's called the path of the Lamb. Because the Lamb who conquers the dragon, the Lamb who conquers the beast, the Lamb who conquers Babylon, he is a lamb who was slain. And in Revelation 12:11, we're invited into a different way. It says, they conquered by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they loved not their lives even to the death. When the Romans came to imprison and torture and kill Christians, they never fought back. They never fought back. Look in church history. You don't ever see the Christians getting together and forming a militia. You don't see them, trying to create a revolt or an uprising or a civil war. Here they are. They're being fed to lions. They're being burned alive while Nero rides his chariots around his gardens. They're using Christians as torches in Caesar's gardens, but the Christians never fight back. How is this possible? Well, here's something I just learned this week. For the first 300 years of the church, you want to know the most quoted verse of the Bible? For the first 300 years of the church, the most quoted verse of the Bible, love your enemies. It's the most quoted verse of the first 300 years of church history. I'm going to tell you about Polycarp. So the beginning of Revelation starts off with these letters to the churches, and they're all in modern-day Turkey. A lot of the New Testament takes place in modern-day Turkey. But Smyrna is a city. I've actually been to Smyrna. I got to go to Turkey when I was like 16. I was like a pack mule, basically, on a little documentary. I just carried around equipment. But anyways, Polycarp was the bishop of Smyrna, and he knew John the Apostle. He was a disciple of the guy who wrote the book of Revelation. And Polycarp's the bishop of Smyrna, a real guy, and he could have skipped out on town because the word was out that the Romans were going to kill all the leaders and kill all the bishops. And so he could have skipped out of town so easily, but he had this dream where he felt like God was telling him he was supposed to lay down his life. And so when the soldiers showed up at Polycarp's door, he cooked them a meal. He served the soldiers a meal. And the record says that they were so struck by his calmness and his kindness and his composure that they regretted having to arrest him. And so they took him and they brought him in, and eventually he ends up at the arena in Smyrna, and he gets fastened to a stake and set on fire. But they give him one more chance to worship Caesar, to worship the emperor, and he says this, and they tell him, curse Christ, denounce Christ, worship the emperor. And Polycarp's famous words are, he was an old man. He goes, 86 years I've served him, and he's done me no wrong. How can I blaspheme my king who saved me? He laid down his life. Well, it struck those soldiers the way he was so brave and so calm, and the way he served them a meal when they were coming to kill him. And that is how Christians conquered Babylon without becoming Babylon. That is how they overcame the beast. That is how they overcame. They overcame him by laying down their lives, not by taking lives. And within a few centuries, it worked. The Roman Empire was overrun with Christians. They had won. The Lamb had triumphed. Check out this quote by Miroslav Volf. Most of us, when we are victims, we need to repent of what perpetrators do to our souls. Victims need to repent of the fact that all too often they mimic the behavior of their oppressors, and they let themselves be shaped into the mirror image of the enemy. Now, Miroslav Volf is by no means victim blaming. Okay, he had family members die in the Croatian genocide at the hands of the Serbs. He knew what it was to be a victim. If you read his whole book, he's extremely nuanced and thoughtful and balanced. But he has a profound insight, and it's an insight I talk about kind of here often. Is that they hate you, so you hate them. They hurt you, so you hurt them back. They cuss at you, so you cuss at them. They disrespect you, so you disrespect them, right? But what Miroslav Volf is saying is this: you're turning into them. You're turning into a mirror image. When you repay evil with evil, evil wins. You just create more evil. But the way to truly break free and not be in control and not be just pulled into the darkness along with them is to say, you know what? I'm going to speak truth to power, but I'm not going to use the power's methods. I'm gonna stand up for what's right. I'm not gonna bow my knee, but at the same time, I'm gonna choose to love my enemies. Like I was saying last week, it's choosing to base your behavior on what Jesus did for you, instead of basing your behavior on what that person did to you. You see the difference? To say, you know what? I could become a mirror image of them and fight fire with fire and repay evil for evil and get sucked into the downward spiral of revenge. But instead, I'm going to fix my eyes on what Jesus did for me, that when I was an enemy of God, that when I was a sinner, that when I was going astray, Jesus loved me and gave himself for me. And I'm going to let that be the thing on which I base my life. And that is how you overcome Babylon without becoming Babylon. And I just want to say this. I always like to try to make it as accessible as possible. That goes for that infuriating coworker that you can't stand. That goes for that immature parent who, was never really there for you emotionally the way they should have been. That goes for that person who's politically different than you. That goes for that spouse or that partner. It goes for that annoying neighbor or that annoying roommate. You're not bowing to them, you're not giving in to them, but you're choosing to not get sucked into their same patterns of behavior, their same methods. So, if Babylon's days are numbered, don't let Babylon pull you into its destructive ways. All right, final thought is that there's an invitation to life beyond Babylon. There's an invitation to life beyond Babylon. I'm just going to read you. This wasn't in Yemi's passage, but felt like to really do justice to the book of Revelation, I gotta show you the end of it. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and He will dwell with them. They will be His people, and God Himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Then he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. See, so many people have this very unbiblical idea that the goal of the Christian life is to go be ghosts in nightgowns in heaven playing harps for all eternity. But that is not biblical. The goal of the Bible isn't to go up and be ghosts in heaven. The goal of the Bible is for God to reign on earth. That's how the story ends. That His love and His righteousness and His wisdom and His goodness would flow over every broken place on this planet. That we would celebrate forever in a redeemed, resurrected, perfected, and purified creation. That in the new heavens and new earth, in the resurrection, it's going to be real. It's going to be clap your hands, stomp your feet. We're going to laugh. We're going to feast. We're going to build. We're going to create. We're going to design. We're going to hug. And best of all, God will be with His people in a love relationship like a honeymoon that never ends. Every trauma, every abuse, every war, every sickness, every depression, each anxiety, every broken heart, every bit of loneliness, every grief, and every grave will be wiped away. He'll wipe each tear from our eyes. There will be radiant light and life and joy, and we will be drenched in the goodness of God. That's the goal. And that's why Babylon has to be banished. Because the abuse, the destruction, the greed, God has to quarantine that evil. He has to cut it off. But man, God wants everyone in on this party. Look at verse 17 of chapter 22. This is like the third to last verse of the Bible. Revelation 22:17. You should memorize this verse. This is your mission should you choose to accept it, Ethan Hunt. The Spirit and the bride say, come. And let the one who hears say, come. And let the one who is thirsty come. Let anyone who wishes take the free gift of the water of life. The bride, all throughout the Bible, that's a metaphor that God wants to be in a love relationship with us. The bride, that's the church. That's you and me. We are the church. And what is the third to last verse of the Bible saying to us? It's saying that our job is to say, come. Come drink freely of the waters of life. You know that our world is thirsty? We are living in a thirsty world. Technology has let us down. It's actually made things worse on our mental health. That's a fact now. Our politicians have let us down. Right now, I actually read this stat prior to the events of last night. There's more wars happening in the world than there has at any time since 1946. Right now, there's wars in Africa. There's wars, Russia, Ukraine, all throughout the Middle East. Now we're a part of another war again. People are scared. Think about your neighbors. Think about your coworkers. They might not say it. They might not voice it out loud. But there is a quiet desperation in people. People need hope. And we did not start this church to be a holy huddle that's just all about us and, oh, well, how do I feel? And how's this going? And it's all about us and just coming in. No, man, we started this church to be outward-minded, to look out for the people around us and extend love and hope. We were made for a mission. To be a follower of Jesus is to join him in his quest to seek and save that which was lost. And I'm inviting you into that quest. I want to tell you something else cool. We have a unique opportunity right now. Pew Research, Gallup poll, Barna Group, they all say that people are spiritually open, that there are actually more people turning to Jesus right now than there has been in the past 30 years. I read an article yesterday in The Economist. It said France, which is a lot like Portland, it's one of the most secular countries in all of Europe, that on Easter 2025, 20,000 people got baptized in France. People are spiritually open. And so I want to invite you to be an inviter. We're going to have the team actually hand out invites right now because I actually mean this stuff. But my desire is that this wouldn't just be a thing we do, twice a year, the team hands out invites or whatever. My desire is that this would be a part of our nature, that this would be a part of who we are as counterculture, that this would be a mindset that we consistently adopt. And I just want to throw this out to you, okay? Suppose Jesus really is risen from the dead. Suppose that everything in this book is true. Suppose that God has come and made himself known in that manger in Bethlehem and in that cross and in that empty grave. If that is true, then we have the meaning of life. And what we're doing is we're inviting people into the purpose of existence. And all the research shows people are thirsty, they're hungry, they're looking for us. And I pray that we'd seize the moment and we'd point people to the Prince of Peace in these days of war and trouble. We'll have the band come back up. Got just 2 more scriptures to share with you. So I want to share verse 11. I think it's important. I just want to do justice by the Bible. But Revelation 22:11 says this, "Let the one who does wrong continue to do wrong. Let the vile person continue to be vile. Let the one who does right continue to do right. Let the holy person continue to be holy." God is unbelievably fair. There are people who are going to reject his invitation. And they're going to embrace the ways of Babylon forever. And the way Lewis puts it is he says there are people who God's going to say to them, "Thy will be done," because they're unwilling to say to him, "Thy will be done." Another way to put it is that God is going to grant people the horrible freedom that they desire. But that's not what God wants, and he's gone to the furthest possible lengths to stop that. And that's why I want to go back to Revelation 21:6. And this is where we'll end. He said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega. I am the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water without cost. from the spring of the water of life. The Apostle John wrote Revelation. He also wrote the Gospel of John. And what does Jesus say? One of the last things he says on the cross is he says, "It is finished." Same Greek word. It is done. Tetelestai. In the Greek, it means paid in full. Jesus paid the cost so that you and I could enter into life and love and purpose without cost. Jesus on the cross was thirsty so that you and I would never thirst again. Jesus finished the work on the cross so that you and I could enter into his gift forever. He was killed by Babylon so that he could build a better city than Babylon. Jesus was rejected so that you and I could be accepted. And he didn't just die for the whole world, he died for you. And that's what we remember each week with communion. God, I thank you that you didn't adopt Babylon's ways, God. That you came as a servant. That you came not to take lives, but to give life. To lay down your life. God, we thank you for the hope, the gospel, the hope of the fact that there's going to be a new creation where we're with you forever, where we experience your beauty and your joy and your love, that you want to give the free gift, the free water of life, that we don't have to be perfect, we don't have to earn it, we don't have to prove ourselves by all of our good behavior, but that Jesus, he earned it for us. We thank you for the bread that was broken for us. We thank you for the cup. God, fill us with your Holy Spirit. Give us a vision that we would be people of invitation. That invitation would be a part of who we are. That we'd want people to find peace, want people to find hope and life and community. We thank you for this time together. We worship you.